Now he takes you into chapter 33, where he's going to appeal to 3 prophets from the brass plates, 2 of which we don't have in our Old Testament today. He's going to take us to Zenos, and he's going to quote Zenos, and then he's going to quote Zenock. Then he's going to take us to the experience with Moses and the brazen serpent up on the pole. Look at Zenos's quote is from verse 4 through verse 11. This is significant because he's giving you a quoted block of text, a chunk of text out of the book of Zenos on the brass plates that we don't have in our Old Testament. So you combine this with Jacob 5, and we got pretty good collection going here of what Zenos wrote. This guy was an amazing prophet. You'll notice as you start in verse 4, what comes right off the page, right at the beginning, what Zenos is focusing our attention on. For he said, quote, "Thou art merciful, O God, for thou hast heard my prayer even when I was in the wilderness. Yea, thou wast merciful when I prayed concerning those who were mine enemies, and thou didst turn them to me. Yea, O God, thou wast merciful unto me when I did cry unto thee in my field." Taylor, what do you have to tell us about the word merciful?
So Tyler and I, as we were getting ready for this lesson, we're talking about the amazing bookends. In fact, actually, Tyler used the phrase bookends that we have in the Book of Mormon. Let's begin with, I'll take the green. 1 Nephi 1, verse 20. And then Moroni, chapter 10, verses 3 through 5. Okay? I like to call this Nephi's thesis statement, or his main testimony. He has actually a pretty robust testimony. This says, "Behold, I will show unto you the tender mercies of the Lord are over all those whom he hath chosen, because of their faith, to make them mighty even unto the power of deliverance." So why is Nephi writing? He wants to give us evidence of God's tender mercies. And then if we go to Moroni 10, 3 to 5, "Behold, I would exhort you that when you read these things," okay, so this is the famous promise that missionaries often share with people who are seeking greater light and truth. And we actually so often focus on verses 4 and 5 that we can feel the Spirit teaching us truth. We often miss the homework assignment that Moroni gives us in verse 3. "I would exhort you that when you read these things, the Book of Mormon, everything that Nephi and others wrote, if it is wisdom in God, that you should read them. And if you have them, just know that God is wise. That you should remember how merciful the Lord hath been unto the children of men." Okay, so that's your assignment. You need to remember how merciful the Lord has been. Okay, there's a timeline. You need to go review every act of mercy that God has ever done in the world, from the creation of Adam, even down to the very moment that you are receiving these things and pondering them in your hearts. Now, I don't know anybody who's actually fully accomplished Moroni's homework assignment. I'm not sure there's enough hours in a lifetime to record and remember every single act of mercy God has ever done. But that is the bookend to the Book of Mormon. Remember God's mercy. And what's interesting here is in Alma 33, which is almost at the center spot of the Book of Mormon, you have mercy, the deep focus from this ancient prophet Zenos, where he is focusing in that the gospel is all about God's mercy. And let me tie this into covenants very briefly. We've talked about the Abrahamic covenant and the Mosaic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant is what God promises to do for us. Let's just call it God's actions. And the Mosaic covenant could be summarized as what God asks us to do in the relationship. Our actions. And there's a mutuality in the covenant, right? God acts on our behalf and he expects us to respond. And the mercy we could actually say that the Abrahamic covenant is a symbol of God's mercy, that God's actions are always about mercy, even in the justice. So if we think back to what Nephi says, the tender mercies of the Lord are over all those whom he hath chosen because of their faith, their actions, to make them mighty even unto the power of deliverance, God's actions to deliver us. So as a lens for understanding the gospel, if we think about the Abrahamic covenant, God's promises and actions to provide us salvation, and the Mosaic covenant, which has been updated by Jesus with the higher law and ongoing prophecy, is our actions to show faith. And this mercy encompasses all of this. And that's what we're hearing in this message in the book of Alma, that as we act on faith, we always can get access to God's mercy. Again, verse 5 of Alma 33, that was merciful unto me when I did cry unto thee in my field. So the action was I cried unto God, and I got from the Abrahamic covenant mercy. Actually, God gave the mercy. Verse 8, thou art merciful unto thy children when they cry unto thee, to be heard of thee and not of men. Verse 9, thou hast been merciful unto me and heard my cries. And what's very interesting is, and I don't want to minimize this, but how much effort is going on here? It's simply prayer. Now, there are many other things we can do to get access to God's mercy, but how hard is it to pray? Like, you can be praying at any moment, wherever you are, you can have a prayer to God and you can experience his mercy. Now, there are many other things to do in this life that we cannot get access to God's mercy, but just know that through prayer, we can have ongoing, continuous access to God's mercy, and that actually is the promise that we get at sacrament.
So to illustrate this just very briefly, we could give thousands of examples of where we've seen this in our life. Back in April, a few months ago, when our second son was down on his mission in Guayaquil, Ecuador, and the whole coronavirus epidemic was getting bigger and bigger and scary down there. And there was a chance that some of our elders and sisters weren't going to make it out of Ecuador. It was amazing to me, the feeling that I got as I watched my dear wife and our children and my siblings and her siblings and nieces and nephews and grandmas and grandpas uniting faith, turning to God, realizing there was nothing any of us could do in the States to get those missionaries and our dear son Jacob home safely. But we turned to God, and there was a feeling of peace, a feeling of be still and know that I am God. Watch me perform miracle after miracle after miracle, mercy after mercy after mercy. All we had to do was exercise faith and trust in him and plead, and those prayers and fasting occurred, to be sure. And when we did get Jacob home, along with dozens and dozens of the last set of missionaries from that Guayaquil area, the stories he told us at every step along the way of getting all of the missionaries in from remote parts of that country into Guayaquil to be able to get onto that very last plane out back to the U.S., back to Miami. I just sat there the whole time as he was telling stories, saying, how great thou art, how merciful the Lord is, how kind he is. And sometimes things don't work out that way in every story. But even then, they work out for whatever is best for us. And that's my faith. That's my trust. That even if I don't get exactly what I was praying for, like we did in this instance, it doesn't mean that God isn't in his heavens and didn't hear his prayer and that we didn't necessarily have faith. Our faith isn't always in just what the exact outcome is going to be. Our faith is in, dear God on high, please bless that this will happen. Nevertheless, not our will, but thine be done. Good things always happen when you turn to the Lord in faith in this way. Now, you'll notice, turn the page over, in verse 11, when he finishes the last verse of Zenos's quote here, notice why God is merciful. Verse 11, and thou didst hear me because of mine afflictions and my sincerity. Okay, so I was sincere in this and you heard me. And it is because of thy Son that thou hast been thus merciful unto me. You could underline or mark or highlight, however you want, that phrase, because of thy Son. It's because of Jesus that God can extend such incredible tender mercies to us in our life. So you have justice, you have me who deserves that justice, and it's headed my way, but Jesus inserts himself betwixt me and justice, so that instead of me getting the justice, he absorbs the justice and in return allows God to give me the mercy, extends the mercy to me. Justice has to be served, has to be paid, and he's doing that. And we'll talk more about that in the next lesson. Look at verse 16, because now he shifts from Zenos to Zenoch. Verse 16, for behold, he said, thou art angry, O Lord, with this people, because they will not understand thy mercies, which thou hast bestowed upon them because of thy Son. And now, my brethren, ye see that a second prophet of old has testified of the Son of God. And because the people would not understand his words, they stoned him to death. So here's an Old Testament prophet that we don't have in the Old Testament, who was stoned to death because of his testimony of the Son of God, apparently. Look at verse 19. Behold, he was spoken of by Moses. So here's our third witness from the brass plates. Because a type and a shadow was raised up in the wilderness of Christ, that if you just look, then you'll live. Look at verse 20. But few understood the meaning of those things, and this because of the hardness of their hearts. But there were many who were so hardened that they would not look. Therefore they perished. Now the reason they would not look is because they did not believe that it would heal them. Remember the Elder Bednar principle, assurance leads to action? They didn't have enough assurance that looking at the serpent would heal them, so they didn't act. They didn't believe, so they didn't act. We talked about the spiral staircase upward of faith. Well, the same principle applies going in the downward direction. You can actually decrease in your level of assurance with failure after failure to act in faith, making it so that you don't believe anything anymore. And you won't act in faith at all at a certain point if you keep digressing. But let's not focus there. Let's go back and focus on the upward trend. Look at verse 21. O my brethren, if you could be healed by merely casting about your eyes that you might be healed, would ye not behold quickly, or would you rather harden your hearts in unbelief and be slothful that you would not cast about your eyes that you might perish? Here's Alma. Can you picture it? He's pleading with these poor Zoramites. Will you just look to Christ? Will you please just trust him? Just call upon God in the name of his Son, and he'll have mercy on you. I know you have problems in your past. We all do. Keep turning to him through this long process of time with diligence and patience and long-suffering. Look at verse 22. If so, woe shall come upon you, but if not so, then cast about your eyes and begin to believe on the Son of God, that he will come to redeem his people, and that he shall suffer and die to atone for their sins, and that he shall rise again from the dead. Are you noticing the faith? They don't see these things. They don't know them for sure. They have to believe. There has to be a level of assurance here to then act in faith, and he's pleading with them to believe in all of these things which are to come for them. Then he finishes by telling them at the very end, may God grant unto you that your burdens may be light through the joy of his Son. And even all this can ye do, if ye will. Amen. He's saying this isn't rocket science. It's not reserved for people who are rich or who are black or white or bond or free or male or female. You can partake of God's goodness and of his mercy and of his grace through his Son if you will, if you'll just turn to him and begin to believe. And I love the fact that at the beginning he said, look, even if you can no more than desire to believe, let's start there. Just nurture that desire until it becomes the act of planting the seed.